So, Jordan Peterson is back in the news. And as someone who is a New Testament nerd, this gives me ample time, now that it's been about 3 weeks or so out, to actually respond and reflect on this. I imagine the fever pitch has died down. Jordan Peterson tends to evoke that sort of visceral response from people. But I wanted to talk a bit about something that's been on my mind a lot for the past, I'd say maybe months, maybe years. And it's not about Jordan Peterson. It's one of those where it's like, it's not that it's directly about him, although he's also been on my mind a lot. It's about kind of the state of men in church. And before we get into all of that, I'm not making any claims about, why men are better than women, or why men should only be pastors or heads of the household or have all these extra, things that they attach. Anyone who knows me knows I don't buy into that. But it is something to where if one part of the body is struggling or going through a lot, then we need to address that, right? And same thing for women. So this is not a male exclusive video here at NTT, but it is an attempt at looking at a specific issue that I'm sure would impact a lot of different people. So thank you for being here. I think so. I came across some research. And so, peering back from the Jordan Peterson thing, the YouTube video has been out there. It's all over the place, so I don't need to rehash it. Essentially, he argues that you have demoralization, you have demasculinized men, specifically younger men. And there's this, of course, there's ideology involved. There's an ideology involved. There's ideology and all this sort of stuff. But essentially, you have, to boil it down, a crisis of masculinity in the church. Men are leaving the church. And of course, that often brings in the resultant commentary about the church becoming feminized, which, of course, is, I don't think, particularly true, and all that sort of stuff. But men leaving the church is a problem for the church, not because men run the church, but because we need men and women together and families and single people and all that in church to actually function as a church. That's what the body is. And so Jordan Peterson kind of brought that up and got the discussion going. But you're also seeing an example being, and this came out from Christianity Today. This was about a week ago, so August 2nd, 2022. Not 2020, it's 2022. It says, white Southern evangelicals are leaving the church. And this is a piece by Daniel K. Williams. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but data suggests that when their attendance drops, these nominal Christians become hyper-individualistic, devoted to law and order, cynical about systems, and distrustful of others. And while I don't think the whole thing isn't entirely relevant to where I'm going with this, but you are seeing people leaving church, and it includes Southern Baptists. And what I thought was really interesting is that this article cites Pew Research, and I love research. And so I went to the site, and it's called it's Pew Research Center out of Washington, D.C. And what they say is attendance at religious services among evangelical Protestants by religious denomination. And then they go through basically, do you attend at least once a week, at least once or twice a month, a few times a year, seldom, never, or don't know. And if you look at it, the majority are about at over 50%, well over 50%. So I'll just run through the data real quick, and I'll link this in the show notes. Assemblies of God has 68% at least once a week, and then the rest once or twice a month or seldom, never. Church of God Cleveland, Tennessee, 77% once or twice, or at least once a week. Church of the Nazarene, 58%. Churches of Christ, 53%. Independent Baptist in the evangelical tradition, 46%. Interdenominational evangelical tradition, 60%. Lutheran Church, the Missouri Synod, 47%. Non-denominational charismatic, 66%. Non-denominational evangelical, 70%. Non-denominational fundamentalist, 59%. Presbyterian Church in America, 44%. Seventh-day Adventist, 67%. And Southern Baptist Convention, 57%. And so that kind of tells us there's a distinct kind of move away from church. It's not as if a lot of people, what seems to be suggested in the article by CT, is that people aren't necessarily abandoning the values per se, although some are, some aren't. But generally, it doesn't seem to be an issue of values. generally speaking. And I'm not speaking about this as a sociologist. I'm a New Testament nerd. I'm a theologian, but I care about the church. I was a pastor for almost 4 years, and I still do pulpit supply and ministry. I've preached a few weeks. I preached on Sunday, or not yesterday, but the Sunday before, at a church in North Los Angeles area. So I'm still involved in ministry, and I'm noticing that there's this kind of crisis in masculinity, and you of course have issues of, and I'll probably get into this more when constructing a theological anthropology in the Women in Ministry series, but I wanted to kind of touch on this a bit because you have young men being vilified or demasculinized or mistreated, and it's this whole kind of thing in church. And often the problem is fairly easy to kind of see, oh, men are leaving church. That's bad. You don't want people leaving church. But a lot of these solutions is to basically go the Mark Driscoll route, where you have basically, oh, well, we need to eat meat and fart and tell horrible jokes about our wives, and kind of you run into this sort of thing in kind of evangelical circles, a lot of evangelical circles, where they think men's ministry is basically farting with dudes and smoking cigars and eating barbecue, which some of those are quite fun. But there becomes an essentialized stereotypical idea of what a man is. They all talk sports. I don't talk sports except baseball and hockey. And even then, yeah, I mean, I do nerd out on some of that, but I think, you need to kind of do stuff. But, whether it's sports or whether it's car racing or cars or mechanics or wrestling or all these sorts of things. And you see this sort of kind of stereotypical idea of what a man is supposed to be in American culture. Guns, for example. I'm not a big gun guy. That's not really interesting to me, but a lot of people are. But I think what we're beginning to see, and what we're going to have to reckon with, is that men are leaving church, and it's for various reasons. And you see this problem in a lot of kind of secular circles, and I don't like calling myself a feminist, just because I then have to explain what I mean and why I don't think men are scum and all that sort of stuff. I don't hate myself. I like being a man. I kind of like being who I am. I like my wife for being who she is. I like my sisters in ministry who preach and teach and lead and do all this stuff. I like them for who they are, but I think the problem remains easy to see, but the solution is elusive. For one, you run the risk of men being put off by the stereotype. The men's ministry, we're going hunting for the weekend. It's like, well, that only appeals to a certain group of people. And of course, and the problem in ministry is you run into issues where you're trying to cater to generalities while trying to avoid pushing away specific people. For example, you might have a young man who's maybe 25, he's single, he's not dating, and so date night with your wife is not of interest to him. He may love English literature, for example. He might love all these things. So going hunting is not of interest to him, and so he's kind of pushed out, and that's a cultural thing. That's not a theological thing per se, but it is a cultural thing. But then again, how do you cater ministry to someone like him? Well, if your church is 75% all on board with that, what do you do about the 25%? Well, I don't know. My first thought is just have multiple things for multiple people and then go from there. One of the jokes I've been telling people is there was no men's ministry or women's ministry before the fall. You have men. So the joke I tell is basically men's ministry and women's ministry are products of the fall. I don't think they're ideal. I don't think they're what God particularly desires for the church. I don't think that sort of thing is good or healthy, but it is something that we live with. And there are some things that men need to talk about with other men, more comfortable, and same thing with women. I had that very often when I was in ministry. Men were very specifically wanted to talk to me about something, and then they'd go talk to women would go talk to the senior pastor, who was a woman, about that. And there was a way of corresponding to one another, to all that sort of stuff. But I asked a few different guys that I know, why don't you like church? And one or two of them said stuff like, oh, it's feminine worship and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, okay, I don't quite know what that means. That sounds more of like a cultural hang up, but it's something to take seriously. And hence why Jordan Peterson and sorry for the scatteredness, there's multiple trains of thought going through my head right now, is Peterson is putting his finger on a real problem. And of course, the solution is usually not as helpful, at least in my experience in reading him. I'm not a hater. I don't put him on a pedestal, and I don't kick him off the pedestal. I'm very neutral when it comes to Jordan Peterson, personally. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that he says and a lot of really not helpful stuff. But there is a problem of men not being either feeling welcome at church or being welcomed at church for who they are. And this is something I noticed was, if you have men leaving church or not coming to church, then what is the solution to that? How do you actually solve the problem? And of course, maybe the issue is you don't think of it as a problem. Maybe you think of it as just a phase. Maybe you think about it as all these sorts of things. But we are seeing Southern Baptists leaving church, specifically white Southern Baptists leaving church. We are seeing a lot of denominations, from the progressives to the conservative to an evangelical, kind of hemorrhaging people. You see, I think non-denominational or evangelical churches are kind of the only ones really maintaining or growing and stuff like that. But what is the solution to this sort of the barrenness of the church, the men leaving church kind of thing? And by the way, sound off in the comments below if you've got ideas, or in the chat. At least for when this premieres. This isn't live at this moment. But I think there's a few things. One, there needs to be, this is going to sound dumb, you need healthy male role models in church. A lot of father issues come up, and men, generally speaking, have fewer friends. Generally speaking, at least in my, and I think I see that experiential. I don't have a ton of friends, and most of my friends don't live in state. One of my best friends lives in Georgia. Another of my best friends lives in Colorado, and so there's just not. And one of my friends lives, a couple hours away, and so it's one of those where guys don't usually have a lot of friends to begin with, and making friends is hard for a lot of guys. Not all guys, and some guys it's very easy. And so I'm speaking in generalities. There are exceptions, and I'm happy to acknowledge those exceptions and make room for them, but just know that generalities are just something you have to speak in generally. And I talked to a few of them about this issue of men not wanting to be in church, and one of them he goes to church. They all do. They're all Christians. But one of them said, if you're a single guy, you kind of have a bit of people have questions. People are kind of, all these sorts of things. And there's kind of assumptions and stereotypes about single guys in church specifically. So that's something already, maybe we have kind of a prejudice or understanding of single guys and all the baggage they may be bringing, or what we think about them. Why are they single? Is there something wrong with them? Those sorts of questions. And so he mentioned that, and I thought that was really interesting. So there may be a sort of inherent stigma against, single people in general, but single men, specifically, especially, we see all these sorts of things about, men behaving badly in church, right? The ACNA scandal, the SBC scandal, the IFB scandal, and all these sort of the Catholic Church. We see all these things, and it's usually, if not almost exclusively perpetrated by men. And so it's one of those where it's like, okay, a single guy in church, why? And I think a lot of people are feeling that. And then going back a step, father issues. So one way to solve it is, one, creating an environment that is respectful of single people, specifically single men. Where they are not viewed as outcasts or weird, unless they have, and I'm assuming this person's an ethical person, this person's a Christian, this person has gifts and calling, all that. Like, I'm assuming, I'm assuming that this person is wonderful, like a wonderful human being, so just go with me on that. But one thing is father figures, and there are those sorts of things that the church doesn't really quite seem to know. And what I got in ministry, for example, like I said, still don't have a lot of friends. Just don't. But one thing in ministry that I grew to love was I was able to go and do visitation for older guys and older gals and older couples, people who were in their 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s. And that wealth of experience was very transformative for me. Got to hear words of affirmation and care and critique, very open to hearing that sort of stuff. In fact, one of the most moving examples, and I won't use this person's name, he has since gone on to be with the Lord, after a very rich and wonderful life. Him and I talked, had a conversation where he tried to encourage, it was very encouraging and affirming of me as a pastor, very, very kind, didn't have to go there. And his wife kind of got up and left, and I was kind of like, she can stay. Like, I'm not bothered. But I think it was one of those where she basically gave him a pat on the shoulder and said, he needs a dad, he needs a father figure to talk to him right now, kind of thing. And she didn't want, I think she was aware of kind of, I don't know, as well as I don't know her mind in that instant, but she got up and left, and he basically just poured into me, about my gifts and my calling, and how he thought I'd be a wonderful senior pastor someday, or teaching pastor, kind of moving beyond the associate role that I was in. And it was one of those moments where at the end of it, I'm just like, I don't, it's very difficult, I think, for a man, one, to take compliments. And he didn't have that problem. So, and I don't know if it's an insecurity, that kind of, that father figure kind of thing, and you kind of wonder about that, right? And so strong father figures, strong brother-like figures, siblings, I think is necessary. And this is something I think the church wants, keeps wanting to grow young. We want young families. We want younger people. And I'm like, yes, I want everyone in church. I want families in church. I want children in church. If I had a church running, I'd be like, if you're, I don't have a problem if you bring your dog to church, just clean up after him or her and make sure he or she's quiet during worship, or not going to bite anyone. No, even then I'm like, I'm okay with some of that. But I think there needs to be older people in church, like an older, and I had mamas, I had many mamas at this church, right? So it wasn't exclusively older men that poured into my life. It was older women as well. Again, I'm not going to name them. I don't think they watch this, but if they were to watch it, they'd know who I'm talking about. Specifically older women, like, I'd go over and do visitation, and I'd be there for an hour, and they would just be everything I ever needed. Just words of kindness, words of affirmation, words of tenderness, words of encouragement, and words of critique. Again, hey, you really do this thing. It really bothers us because it's distracting. And we notice this, but here's how you can do this. And there was a constructiveness to it. There was a building up and all that. And so I think one of the ways of creating an environment where, we'll say younger men, not exclusively, but in this video, younger men can feel welcome, is having older people around. And I think older people with the wisdom and experience and the life they've lived, right? Like having an older mama, someone in their 70s or 80s who's lived a life, who's had kiddos, who's gone through all sorts of things, postpartum depression, marriage, failed marriages, been widowed, on and on it goes. There's nothing like having an older mama that will just kick you in the butt, make you a cookie, and then have you sit there and she'll list off what you need to do, and she'll give it to you, And there's something incredibly empowering and insightful about having older men and older women in church that are willing to invest in younger men. So I think that's one thing, just generally speaking, I think the church needs. It needs to value its senior members and leaders, and have those people really invest in younger men, giving those men a place and calling, that they are welcome in this space. And so I think that's one way of doing it. And that, I think, goes very strongly to creating a culture that is very much centered on family, having that older person that knows the world, knows what it's like to be depressed and to suffer and to feel you don't have a purpose in life. And so I think that's one thing. I think that's actually one of the main things I would suggest. And it's something that can happen quite a bit. And I don't think it's unreasonable or crazy. And it kind of goes against the fad of the church wanting to be young. By going young, you need older people. You need senior members. You need mamas and papas and grandpas and grandmas. You need them to kind of speak into your life. And the second thing I would say, and this, again, I don't have anything written down. I'm just kind of going off what I've been thinking about for a while, is how do I put this? What's a good way of saying this? We need to have a theology, a cultural theology that doesn't give young men what they want. And I want to be very careful with how I say this. If you tell a young man that his mission in life is to get married, have a bunch of kids, have sex with his wife a million times, be all that. You're going to create a toxic culture where to be male is to not be female. And I think we see that a lot in churches, specifically in ministry. That goes, and it kind of builds off those previous ideas I mentioned. I think there needs to be positive theological construction of culture. There needs to be an understanding of to be male is not the antithesis of female. Like, I'm not, you don't go, if you go up to a guy and go, who are you? Go, well, I'm not a woman. It's like, well, okay. That one pits women against men in a way I think is just not constructive and not theologically. I don't think that's biblical at all. But I do think there needs to be a positive, constructive assessment of what it means to be a man. And avoiding easy cultural kind of slogans like a man provides. It's like, well, sure. A man leads. Sure. A man does this. Sure. But you'll notice a lot of these things, it's usually hyper machismo, narcissistic nonsense, right? Jesus had a tattoo. Jesus was gruff and mean. Jesus this, Jesus that, on and on. It's like Jesus comes out looking like he's, auditioning for the WWE, right? Like, it's nonsense. It's pseudo-intellectual, masturbatory, intellectual, bankrupt nonsense, right? It's garbage theology. And it idealizes and dehumanizes men in the process. And women as well, I would say. But building a ministry Christologically, okay, let's look to Paul literally tells us this. Paul gives us the actual, and I'll get more into this, as the series goes, but it's like, what is the mindset that we are all to have, right? What is the mindset? And I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna just read the passage a little bit. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. And so already that's Philippians 2, 1-4 from the NIV. That tells us already what Paul demands and wants from his churches, what he wants formation to be like. It is about, and notice these words, tenderness or compassion, comfort from his love, common sharing in the Spirit, encouragement, united to Christ, being of one spirit and one mind, not essentializing men or tokenizing women, but having this sort of spirited community that says, yes, we are different. Men are different from women. Women are different from men. But that does not push us away from each other. Rather, it's what unites us as literally the body of Christ, right? And not about seeking your own glory, seeking your sexual prowess, seeking, to be the man of the house or the man of the church or the woman of the church even. But compassion, tenderness. These are the things that we should embody Christologically. And so part of the issue is Christology. You don't have a robust doctrine of what it means to be human in light of Christ. And what does Christ do? It says, in your relationships and with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, or being in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature or form of a servant, slave, being found in and being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man or human, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, you go on to talk about God exalting him, and every tongue and everyone bowing and all this sort of stuff. But that whole paradigm of what it means to be human is to be seen in light of what Christ did. Christ emptied himself. He took the form of a slave. He did not seek his own status. Rather, he gave that status up for the sake of his brothers and sisters. And if that model, that Christological model, is applied to men's ministry, then you have basically the opposite. You go, okay, instead of being a belching, caricature of Homer Simpson, and I see this a lot on YouTube, rather than being hard-hearted and I tell the truth and all these sorts of things, and you should tell the truth, by the way, rather than being this, rather look at what Jesus is actually said to be and what Paul demands of us. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Christ is the center of our conception of what it means to be human. And part of it is constructing a theological anthropology that values men and women as women, that doesn't pit them against one another or put them over one another, but prioritizes them together. As well, I was going to try and do this is the church, this is the steeple, but in the heat of this room, I forgot how to do that. So, well, you know what? This is the church, this is the steeple, open the doors, and there's all the people. There we go. We'll go with that. I don't know why they're all white. I wish there was more racial diversity in my church, but we'll just go with that. But I think those are kind of things, two ways we can initially begin the conversation. Again, in the chat, in the comments, let me know what you're thinking. I think there's so much. Ooh, the hair and the heat. Oof, awful. I think those are two ways to kind of go about it. And third, and maybe this one's more tentative, No, I know what I want to say. I'm just trying to figure out how to say it nicely. We should take the concerns of Peterson and the toxic response to masculinity, and that's of course not saying that toxic masculinity is good or that patriarchy and all that stuff is good, but it is to say maybe and maybe this undoes what I did, but I'm thinking maybe we need to not be worried about, maybe that's just a fascination we have in America with getting people in church, right? We cater specifically to specific people or groups that we like, and we see this all across the spectrum from conservative churches to progressive churches. We have buzzwords we use. We have corporate kind of slogans and models that we like. We have numbers we want to catch. We want to do all this sort of stuff. And maybe we need to kind of get away from that. So maybe one of the ways to solve it is to not view it as a problem, to not go, but we need to have 50-50. We can't have this 70-30, 80-20, 90-10. We got to have 50-50. And it's like, maybe that's not your calling. Maybe there's something to be said about viewing numbers this way in the church. And this is assuming the church isn't, preaching against women or against men or talking about women as if they're not in the room or telling men to be shotgun style, bozos, all this. Assuming that the church is preaching healthy, it is theologically robust, not catering to that is maybe one of the issues, because if church becomes a safe place in the sense of being fed what you want to hear, then maybe we have kind of corporatized the church a little bit too much, And that one I want to hear what y'all are thinking on that, because I'm just thinking of that right now, and I don't think it undoes anything I've said, because I still think those two previous ideas are really, really good. But I want to beware of chasing numbers instead of chasing the spirit, I want us to kind of be more mindful of that. So the message and guys in the comments below specifically, I want to hear from you. If I were a pastor again, specifically in a church, and I were building something from the ground up, I don't know if I would even do men's ministry. I think what I would do would be, here are things that anyone can come to. It's going to be a barbecue, and they're going to be, for example, let's say it's that kind of place. There's going to be cigars, whiskey, and barbecue, and then we're going to watch Braveheart. Anyone can come to this. Anyone can come to this. And my wife, I don't know if she gave me the idea, but her and I talked about it, so I'll give her that idea. She's like, that sounds like a good time. And I was like, I don't know, that'd be a good time with me too. Let's go, kind of thing. And you will have people that caters to certain people, but it's not an exclusive thing. So maybe the point is getting more integrative as a family and not doing things that we need to get men in church, versus we need to think about discipleship and joy together. And part of that may mean listening to hard stories about why men feel pushed around or shoved or mistreated or misunderstood. And that means apologizing. And it's going to sound so, I think men have feelings too. And given that men don't have a lot of friends, generally speaking, and men don't seem to have a lot of outlets for kind of dealing with that, mental health specifically is a huge deal, trauma, depression. A lot of guys don't have words for that, right? We don't have a lot of words for that. And so maybe we need to kind of reconfigure what the church is meant to be in light of that. We don't change the church to suit the whims. We don't change the church for that thing. But maybe we go, here's this vision that we are not living up to. And maybe if we are the body of Christ, then that means women need to be worried about men not coming to church too. And if the reverse was true, I mean, here's the thing. We know why a lot of women don't come to evangelical churches, because their theology of women is really bad. Women can't be pastors. Women can't do this. Women can't do that. And so a lot of women are like, well, fine, I'm just going to go to this church, or I'm just not going to go to church, And then, I'm not saying it's all shaking the fist, the school marm, naughty, naughty, naughty church, but we can look and go, oh, well, that makes sense why a lot of women wouldn't feel comfortable there. Or abuse. That happens all the time, right? And I've alluded to that before and all that. But with men, I think there remains work to be done. And I would love to see churches begin to try to address that problem and create a culture where young men especially, would feel needed and valued. Because at the end of the day, a man provides. It's like, no. A man needs to feel as if he's contributing something of value. Doesn't mean he needs to be the king of the house, and he shouldn't be. Doesn't mean he can't be a leader, because he should. Not the leader, but a leader. A leader in the community together, a leader among leaders, or in a marriage, a leader with another leader. Your wife also leads too. But maybe a man needs to feel like he's got his gifts are being used, and he's desired and wants to be there. People look up to you. And maybe that's a way to get things kind of reconfigured and recalibrated. Men need to feel like there is that sort of thing. And what better place to have that than older men and women investing in younger men. And younger women too, of course. Like, that goes without saying. But y'all know what I'm saying. So, I don't know. Sound off in the comments. Let me know what you think. I've not been exhaustive with this. It's one of those where the more I think about it, the more I've got questions. And now, in light of this, I'm like, boy, there's so much more I could be talking about. But let me know what you think. There's so much more to be said. And I think at the end of the day, we want everyone to be in church. We want everyone to feel as if they are welcomed in church, that they take joy in being there. Yeah. Yeah. Just something to think about. All right. God bless everyone. Take care. And we're over halfway to Christmas, so cheers and Merry Christmas. This is a coffee at 3 p.m, which is not smart, but cheers anyway.